Hello, and welcome to the channel. The story you're about to hear is about the price of childhood stardom in Hollywood's golden age, yet it speaks directly to questions we still grapple with today. What do parents owe their children? When does ambition become exploitation? Can fame ever justify the theft of innocence? Picture a soundstage in 1935. Under blinding Klieg lights, a 7-year-old performs the same tap routine for the 47th time. Her feet bleed inside her shoes. The mother watches from behind the camera, counting the money this will bring. This scene, replicated across studios with different children, different mothers, different varieties of cruelty, reveals a darkness at the heart of America's dream factory that the industry spent decades concealing. The lights were always hot in those early sound stages. The primitive arc lamps required for film photography generated temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. Child performers worked under these conditions for 12, 14, sometimes 16 hours at a stretch. Their mothers watched. Their fathers negotiated contracts, and the money flowed in torrents that would make modern stars envious. But where did that money go? Who controlled it? Who decided that a 4-year-old should work until she collapsed? Who administered the pills that kept exhausted children performing? Who told a traumatized teenager to keep quiet about assault because speaking up might damage her career? The parents did. The mothers and fathers who were supposed to protect these children instead fed them to the machine, piece by piece, year by year, justifying every cruelty with the promise of stardom, with the lure of wealth, with the conviction that sacrifice today would mean security tomorrow. They were wrong. Or perhaps they knew the truth and simply didn't care. Perhaps they understood perfectly well that they were destroying their children's childhoods, stealing their earnings, breaking their bodies and minds. Perhaps the money was simply too good, the vicarious fame too intoxicating, the opportunity to live through their talented offspring too tempting to resist. This is the story of what happened when parental love curdled into possession, when children became commodities, when the bright lights of Hollywood cast shadows so deep that some never found their way out. These are the stories of Judy Garland, whose mother fed her amphetamines before she reached puberty, of Jackie Coogan, whose parents stole millions from their child and felt no shame, of baby Peggy, who supported an extended family before she learned to read, then was blamed when the money stopped, of Natalie Wood, whose mother told her to accept assault as the price of fame, of Brooke Shields, whose mother sold her daughter's innocence and called it art. The industry knew. Studio executives, directors, fellow performers, they all witnessed the abuse and said nothing. The culture of silence around child exploitation in Hollywood ran deep, protected by money, by power, by the understanding that speaking up meant career destruction. So the machine kept running, grinding up children and spitting out damaged adults who would spend lifetimes trying to recover what had been stolen from them. Some of these children became the greatest performers of their generation. Judy Garland's voice could break hearts. Jackie Coogan's comedic timing made him Charlie Chaplin's chosen co-star. Natalie Wood became one of the most luminous actresses in cinema history. Their talent was real, undeniable, extraordinary. But talent didn't protect them. If anything, it made them more valuable, more exploitable, more worth destroying. The legal system offered no protection until Jackie Coogan's lawsuit in the late 1930s. California law gave parents absolute control over their children's earnings. A child could earn millions, and the parents could spend every penny without consequence. The courts viewed children as property, their labor as belonging to parents by natural right. Even after the Coogan law passed in 1939, it protected only 15% of earnings. The rest remained vulnerable to parental theft. 85% of a child's income could legally disappear into parental bank accounts. But laws can't heal psychological damage. They can't restore stolen childhoods. They can't undo the moment when a child realizes her mother values her only as an income source. When a boy discovers his father has been stealing from him for years. When a teenager understands that her safety matters less than her career. They can't repair the broken trust, the betrayed innocence, the fundamental violation of the parent-child relationship that should be the safest bond in human experience. These stories span decades, from the silent film era through the golden age of Hollywood into the latter 20th century. The technology changed. Silent films gave way to sound, black and white to color, studio lots to location shooting. The studios rose and fell, their power diminishing as contracts loosened and stars gained independence. The culture shifted, public attitudes evolved, awareness of child welfare improved. But the pattern of parental exploitation remained remarkably consistent. Different children, different parents, different decades, but the same fundamental betrayal played out again and again. Why tell these stories now? Because they matter. Because the children who suffered deserve to be remembered, not just as performers, but as victims of a system that valued profit over protection. Because the lessons they learned at such terrible cost about the corruption that can infect the parent-child relationship when fame and money enter the equation remain relevant. Because scroll through social media today and you'll see new versions of the same exploitation. Children being monetized and controlled by parents who convince themselves they're providing opportunities. The bright lights still cast dark shadows. Some children still pay the price for their parents' dreams. And the only defense against repetition is remembering what happened before, understanding how it happened, and recognizing the warning signs before another generation of talented children gets fed to the machine. This is their story. These are the stage parents nobody talked about. The cruelties hidden behind Hollywood glamour. The price of fame counted in damaged lives and stolen childhoods. Listen, remember, and understand what happens when parents stop protecting their children and start exploiting them instead. Frances Ethel Gum was born June 10th, 1922, in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, to vaudeville performers who saw dollar signs in their daughter's voice before she could walk. Her father, Frank Gum, owned the New Grand Theater, a small-town movie house where he performed between film screenings. It was modest work, the kind of steady employment that kept food on the table, but offered no path to genuine success. Her mother, Ethel Marion Milne, had abandoned her own performing ambitions to marry Frank, and the resentment of that sacrifice never entirely faded. She had talent, she believed, real talent, that had been wasted on a bad marriage in a nowhere town. Ethel had married badly, and she knew it. Frank Gum was homosexual in an era when that meant ruin if discovered. Their marriage was an arrangement of convenience that trapped Ethel in a small Minnesota town when she'd dreamed of stages in Chicago or New York. She had 3 daughters, Mary Jane, Virginia, and finally Frances, and she saw them as her second chance at the spotlight she'd lost. By age 2.5, Frances was performing Jingle Bells on stage during Christmas. The audience watched a toddler sing, charmed by her precocious talent. Behind the curtain, Ethel watched with different eyes. She saw potential earnings, future fame, escape from the life she'd settled for. The child's voice was exceptional, undeniably so. That voice would be Ethel's ticket out. Witnesses described Ethel in the wings during those early performances, mouthing every word. Her face contorted with an intensity that frightened other performers. When Frances forgot lyrics, Ethel's backstage punishments were swift and silent. A pinch that left bruises hidden under costumes. A slap timed so stagehands wouldn't see. The child learned quickly that love came after applause, that approval was conditional on performance. The family relocated to California in 1926, following rumors that Frank's sexuality had been discovered. The official story was opportunity in the growing film industry. The reality was escape before scandal destroyed them. Small-town Minnesota in the 1920s had no tolerance for homosexuality. Discovery meant ruin, social, professional, potentially criminal. The Gums left before the whispers became accusations. They settled in Lancaster, California, a desert town north of Los Angeles, where Frank bought another theater and Ethel drove the transformation of her daughters into a performing act. The move west was supposed to be a fresh start. For Ethel, it was an opportunity. The Gum sisters played local theaters, and any place else Ethel could book them. Mary Jane and Virginia were competent performers. Frances was something else entirely. That voice, mature beyond her years, capable of emotional depth that seemed impossible from such a young child, drew attention wherever she performed. Ethel recognized what she had. She pushed harder. By age 4, Frances understood the fundamental equation of her existence. Performance equaled love. Mistakes equaled rejection. Her worth as a daughter depended entirely on her worth as a performer. This lesson, learned before she could read, would shape every relationship she ever had. Ethel's ambition knew no reasonable limits. She dragged her daughters to amateur nights, talent contests, any venue that might lead to discovery. In 1934, the Gum sisters performed at the World's Fair in Chicago. An agent noticed. Frances was 12 years old, small for her age, with a voice that could fill theaters. Within months, she had a screen test at MGM. Louis B. Mayer, the studio head whose cruelty would become legendary, watched the test and saw potential. The child was plain, too short, features too irregular, developing the wrong kind of figure. But that voice, they could work with the voice. They offered a contract. Ethel negotiated. The contract wasn't just for Frances. Ethel wanted a salary as her daughter's guardian and coach. She wanted control. She wanted money. She got everything she asked for. Frances Gum became Judy Garland, a name chosen by studio publicists who thought Gum sounded ridiculous. The 12-year-old girl signed papers she couldn't understand, binding herself to a studio that would work her like machinery. And her mother smiled, having secured her own salary from her daughter's contract. Ethel had finally escaped small-town Minnesota. She had finally returned to show business. All it cost was her daughter's childhood. MGM put Judy to work immediately. The studio system operated on brutal efficiency. Child stars worked the same hours as adults, performed the same number of takes, met the same impossible standards. Judy was small, so they cast her as younger than her age, perpetual child roles that required her to suppress normal adolescent development. The studio controlled everything: her appearance, her publicity, her friendships, her education, all managed by MGM's machinery. But the daily management, the intimate control that belonged to Ethel. She was on set every day, watching her daughter work, monitoring every interaction, ensuring Judy remained focused on the only thing that mattered: the career, the money, the success that justified everything. Ethel rented a house in Culver City, close to the studio. She decorated it with furniture purchased from Judy's earnings. She bought cars, clothes, supported her other daughters, all funded by the 12-year-old who worked 10-hour days on sound stages. When Judy came home exhausted, Ethel reminded her to be grateful. This was the life they dreamed of. This was success. At night, lying in bed in a house purchased with her own labor, Judy Garland learned what it meant to be valuable only for what you could produce. Her mother's love, such as it was, existed only in relation to Judy's career. There was no unconditional acceptance, no safety net of parental affection that would catch her if she failed. The child who'd learned at age 4 that performance equaled love now understood the corollary. No performance meant no love at all. She was 12 years old, and already she understood that she was alone, that the machinery surrounding her existed to extract value from her talent, that even her mother viewed her primarily as an asset to be managed rather than a daughter to be cherished. The machinery was in place, the pattern established. All that remained was to see how much the child could endure before she broke completely. When MGM signed 12-year-old Frances Gumm in 1935, renaming her Judy Garland, the studio acquired not just a performer, but a commodity to be shaped, controlled, and exploited for maximum profit. The machinery of that exploitation required cooperation at every level. Studio executives set policy. Directors pushed for longer hours. Producers demanded perfection in take after take. Publicity departments manufactured her image. Contract departments bound her to terms she couldn't understand. And Ethel Gumm administered the pills that made it all possible. The chemical fuel that kept her daughter functioning past normal human limits. Studio memos from the era, now yellowed and filed in archives, reveal the systematic nature of the abuse. MGM kept child performers working 18-hour days through a simple mechanism. Benzodrine tablets in the morning to provide artificial energy. Seconal at night to force sleep. The cycle repeated daily, destroying young metabolisms before they fully developed. Judy Garland was not the only child subjected to this regimen, but she was among the youngest when it began. Ethel personally administered the medications. Former MGM employees later testified to watching her deliver pills to Judy on set, monitoring intake with the precision of a pharmacist. One makeup artist recalled, "Mrs. Gum knew every medication Judy took. She tracked it in a little notebook. She was proud of the system. She'd tell other stage mothers about it, recommending dosages." The studio provided the pills. Ethel ensured Judy took them. This partnership between corporate exploitation and maternal complicity created a dependency that would eventually kill Judy Garland. She was 12 years old when the cycle began. Her body never recovered. Louis B. Mayer, the studio head who wielded absolute power over his contract players, had particular contempt for Judy. He called her "my little hunchback" because her adolescent body was developing curves inappropriate for the perpetual child roles they cast her in. The cruelty wasn't casual. It was calculated, designed to keep her insecure, manageable, dependent on studio approval. The studio put her on a diet of cigarettes, coffee, and appetite suppressants. No solid food, just stimulants and chemicals. Ethel supervised this regimen personally, monitoring what her daughter ate with obsessive attention, counting calories, measuring portions, ensuring Judy remained the right size for the camera. When Judy begged for real food, Ethel reminded her of the contract, the money, the career that justified everything. "You want to lose this?" Ethel would ask, gesturing at the studio lot, the sound stages, the infrastructure of fame that surrounded them. "You want to go back to Lancaster? Back to nothing?" The message was clear. Endure the hunger, take the pills, maintain the career. Everything else was secondary. The other young performers at MGM noticed. Mickey Rooney, who starred opposite Judy in multiple films, later recalled the pills being delivered between takes. "Everyone knew," he said, "but nobody said anything. That was how the studio worked. You kept quiet or you were done." The culture of silence around child exploitation ran deep, protected by the understanding that speaking up meant career destruction. The tragedy deepened during The Wizard of Oz production in 1938 and 1939. 16-year-old Judy, bound into a corset to flatten her developing figure and fed amphetamines to maintain the brutal schedule, would look for her mother between takes. The filming stretched across months, with endless retakes and demanding musical numbers. Judy performed Over the Rainbow repeatedly, finding emotional truth in the lyrics about wanting to escape somewhere better. The irony was lost on no one, except perhaps Ethel. Judy would be there, exhausted and wired simultaneously from the pills, searching the crowd of technicians and executives for her mother's face. Ethel would be there, watching from behind the camera, and she would smile and hold up the pill bottle. "That's my good girl," witnesses heard her say. "Just a little longer." The film that would make Judy Garland immortal was created through systematic abuse. The hours were crushing. The physical demands, the dancing, the singing, the endless retakes under lights hot enough to cause burns, pushed Judy past normal human endurance. The pills made it possible. Ethel made sure Judy kept taking them. Between scenes, Judy would sit in her dressing room, shaking from the Benzedrine, unable to calm down even though she was exhausted. The amphetamines created a horrible paradox. Her body was depleted, screaming for rest, but her mind raced, unable to settle. Ethel would sit with her during these moments, talking about the money they were making, the career they were building, the future they were securing. The pills were necessary, Ethel explained. Temporary, just until Judy got through this production, this schedule, this phase of her career. The justifications were endless, and Judy, still a teenager, trained since early childhood to trust her mother's judgment, believed her mother knew best. The studio owned Judy's image, her time, her creative output. But Ethel owned something more fundamental. She controlled Judy's understanding of reality, her sense of what was normal, her baseline for what a mother's love should look like. When your mother hands you amphetamines and tells you it's for your own good, when she monitors your food intake and calls it care, when she positions abuse as opportunity, what defense does a child have? Judy Garland finished The Wizard of Oz at 17. Her metabolism permanently damaged, her relationship with food and sleep and consciousness itself fundamentally broken. She had been taking pills for 5 years. She would take them for the rest of her life. And Ethel Gum felt no guilt, no remorse, no recognition that she had participated in destroying her daughter's body for money. The film premiered in August 1939 to massive success. Judy Garland sang Over the Rainbow and became a star. Audiences watching had no idea they were seeing a girl who'd been systematically drugged to create that performance. They saw talent, charm, that extraordinary voice. They didn't see the machinery behind it, the pills and the pressure and the mother who enabled it all. Ethel saw the box office receipts and smiled. Her investment was paying off. The moment Judy Garland turned 21 in 1943, she gained legal access to the trust fund that should have contained her earnings from 8 years of MGM contracts. 21 was the age of majority in California, the point at which parental control legally ended and adult rights began. She had been working since age 12, earning substantial salaries that increased with each successful film. Her early contracts paid thousands per week. Later contracts, after she became a major star, paid significantly more. The Wizard of Oz alone had generated enormous revenue for MGM, making the studio millions. Her contracts over the years were worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps approaching $1 million when all the films and appearances were calculated. She expected financial security, independence, the freedom that money should have provided. She found less than $10,000. Ethel had been systematically stealing. That's the blunt truth, though Ethel would never have used that word. She'd been managing Judy's finances, making investments, supporting the family, purchasing real estate in her own name. The money Judy earned through 18-hour workdays, through amphetamine addiction, through sacrificed childhood. Ethel had spent it all. Properties in Judy's name that Ethel controlled. Furniture, cars, clothes purchased from Judy's labor. Money given to Judy's sisters, supporting their lives and careers. Ethel's own salary as Judy's guardian and coach came directly from MGM. But apparently that wasn't enough. She'd helped herself to Judy's earnings as well, viewing them as family money to which she had automatic rights. Confronted with the evidence, bank records, property deeds, receipts showing years of expenditures from Judy's accounts, Ethel showed no remorse. "I made you," she reportedly told Judy during one heated conversation. "Everything you are, I created. The money was mine by right." This was Ethel's genuine conviction, not a defensive rationalization, but a deeply held belief. She had birthed Judy, trained her, pushed her into performing, negotiated her contracts, managed her career, administered the pills that kept her working. In Ethel's mind, Judy's earnings were simply compensation for Ethel's own unrealized ambitions, payment for the career Ethel had sacrificed to create her daughter's success. The discovery devastated Judy in ways that went beyond financial loss. Money could be earned back, but the realization that her mother had been stealing from her for years, viewing her as nothing more than an income source, that wound went deeper than any accountant could calculate. Judy had endured the pills, the diets, the brutal schedules, believing it was building toward security. Instead, her mother had been plundering her earnings while Judy worked herself into drug dependency. The relationship fractured, though not immediately. Judy was still young, still conditioned by years of maternal control, still hoping somewhere that Ethel might acknowledge what she'd done and apologize. That apology never came. Ethel remained convinced of her own righteousness, certain that she'd done nothing wrong. When Judy married composer David Rose in 1941, Ethel inserted herself into the marriage. She insisted on living with the couple, monitoring their relationship, maintaining control over her daughter, even as Judy tried to build an adult life. Judy, conditioned by years of accepting her mother's invasions, didn't know how to refuse. Rose tolerated Ethel's presence until the marriage became impossible. The breaking point came when Judy became pregnant. At 20 years old, married and financially successful despite her mother's theft, Judy wanted the child. But MGM had other plans. The studio that owned her contract viewed pregnancy as a threat to their investment. They wanted Judy available for filming, not sidelined by motherhood. And Ethel agreed with them. In consultation with MGM, her true loyalty always to the career, never to her daughter, Ethel forced Judy to abort. "The studio invested too much in you," Ethel explained. "You owe them this." The casual cruelty of the statement, the reduction of Judy's bodily autonomy to contract obligations, the assumption that MGM's financial interests outweighed Judy's right to motherhood, all of it came naturally to Ethel. She genuinely believed the studio's needs superseded her daughter's desires. Judy would later call this the moment she understood her mother had never loved her. Not as a daughter, not as a human being, only as an earning instrument, a means to financial security and vicarious fame. Everything Ethel had done, the pills, the diets, the stolen money, the forced abortion, all of it made sense once Judy understood the fundamental truth. She had never been a child to Ethel. She had always been a commodity. After MGM fired Judy in 1950, following her first suicide attempt, Ethel attempted reconciliation. By then, Judy was 28, battling addictions that had started with her mother's pill administration at age 12, struggling with weight issues caused by decades of disordered eating, psychologically damaged in ways that no amount of therapy could fully heal. And Ethel wanted back into her life. Judy refused contact. The boundary, once finally established, held firm. When Ethel died in 1953, Judy was performing at the Palladium in London. She received word of her mother's death backstage between shows. She did not return for the funeral. She did not interrupt her performance schedule. She finished the engagement, fulfilling her professional obligations, just as Ethel had trained her to do. In interviews years later, when journalists asked about her mother, Judy's voice would crack. The wounds never fully healed. "She destroyed me," Judy said simply in one interview. Legally, methodically, with absolute conviction that she was doing the right thing. In another interview, asked if she'd forgiven her mother, Judy paused before answering. "I understood her," she finally said. Understanding isn't the same as forgiveness. Ethel Gum died believing she had been a good mother. She had pushed Judy into stardom, negotiated lucrative contracts, ensured her daughter's fame. That the fame came at the cost of Judy's health. That the contracts enriched Ethel more than Judy. That the career destroyed the daughter. None of this registered as failure in Ethel's mind. She had created a star. What more could a mother do? Judy Garland died in 1969 at age 47. Her body destroyed by the drug addiction her mother initiated when Judy was 12 years old. Born October 26, 1914, John Leslie Coogan became the template for every exploited child star who followed. His story established the pattern that would repeat across generations. Talented child discovers performing ability. Ambitious parents recognize commercial potential. Enormous earnings flow in. Systematic theft occurs. And laws protecting parental rights over children's welfare enable it all. Jackie Coogan didn't just lose his childhood to Hollywood. He lost millions of dollars to his parents and changed American law in the process. His name would become synonymous with child exploitation, attached to legislation designed to prevent future parents from doing what his parents did to him. His father, Jack Coogan Sr., was a vaudeville performer whose career had stalled by the time Jackie was born. The senior Coogan had talent, but not enough to break through to real success. He worked the circuits, earned modest money, watched other performers achieve the fame that eluded him. When his son showed natural comedic timing at age 4, Jack Sr. saw redemption. This child would succeed where the father had failed. Jack Sr. began featuring Jackie in his vaudeville act. The boy was a natural. He could take pratfalls without crying, deliver lines with perfect timing, read audiences with intuition that seemed impossible for someone so young. Vaudeville crowds loved him, but vaudeville was dying, being killed by moving pictures. The real money was in Hollywood. In 1919, Charlie Chaplin saw 5-year-old Jackie perform in Los Angeles. Chaplin was already the biggest star in film, commanding unprecedented salaries and creative control. He was developing The Kid, a feature film that required a child co-star capable of matching Chaplin's own performance. He hired Jackie Coogan. The Kid premiered in 1921 when Jackie was 7 years old. The film was a massive success, earning over $2.5 million, an extraordinary sum for the era. Jackie's performance was universally praised. He became, essentially overnight, the first major child star of American cinema, and the money started flowing. By age 7, Jackie Coogan was earning $22,500 per week. To understand that figure in modern terms, consider that it equals approximately $350,000 weakly in current purchasing power. This was 1921, when America was just emerging from World War I, when the economy was transitioning from wartime production back to civilian goods. The average American worker earned less than $1,500 per year, supporting entire families on that modest income. Jackie was earning more in a week than most Americans earned in a decade. He was 7 years old and generating wealth that exceeded the lifetime earnings of most adults. Jack Coogan Sr. negotiated every contract. He positioned himself as both father and manager, taking percentages of everything Jackie earned. The distinction between parental role and business relationship blurred, then vanished entirely. Jack Sr. quit performing to manage his son's career full-time. Jackie was the family business, the investment that would pay returns for everyone. Between 1921 and 1927, Jackie Coogan earned over $4 million. He worked constantly, sometimes 3 films simultaneously, moving from studio to studio, performing on schedules that would exhaust adult workers. Jack Sr. collected every check, deposited the money, told Jackie it was being saved for his future. The child believed him. Why wouldn't he? The man was his father. Jack Sr. presented himself to the world as a devoted parent, protecting his talented son from exploitation. He negotiated hard with studios, demanding top dollar, insisting on good working conditions. He gave interviews about the importance of education, of normal childhood experiences, of not letting fame corrupt his boy, and all the while, he was spending Jackie's money as fast as it came in. The Coogan family lived lavishly. Mansions, cars, servants, investments in Jack Sr.'s name, money given to relatives, to friends, to anyone in the expanding circle of people who fed off Jackie's labor. Jack Sr. bought property, started businesses, pursued ventures that interested him, all funded by his 7-year-old son's film career. Jackie trusted his father completely. When other child performers whispered about being exploited by their parents, Jackie defended Jack Sr. "My father would never steal from me," he reportedly told another child actor. "He's investing everything for when I grow up. He's making sure I'll be set for life." The work continued through Jackie's childhood and into adolescence. By his teenage years, the public was losing interest in the child star who'd grown up. Roles became less frequent, salaries dropped. But the family's spending didn't adjust. They'd become accustomed to extreme wealth. Jack Sr. assumed it would last forever. In 1935, Jack Coogan Sr. died in a car accident. Jackie, now 21 years old, finally had legal access to his earnings. He went to his mother Lillian, Jack Sr.'s widow, who had remarried a family friend named Arthur Bernstein, to claim the fortune his father had promised was being saved. Lillian informed Jackie there was no money. It had all been spent, she claimed, on Jackie's upbringing and education. Jackie didn't believe her. $4 million couldn't simply vanish. He hired lawyers, demanded accounting, insisted on seeing records. What he'd discovered was worse than he'd imagined. His parents hadn't just spent the money carelessly. They'd systematically stolen it, purchasing property and investments in their own names, living in luxury while telling Jackie the money was being saved for him. The man Jackie had trusted most in the world, his own father, had been lying to him for his entire childhood. Every promise, every assurance, every "this is for your future." All lies. Jack Coogan Sr. had viewed his son as an ATM, extracting money for over a decade while maintaining the pretense of parental care. And Lillian, Jackie's mother, showed no shame. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents, she would later testify in court. This was her genuine belief. Jackie's earnings were family property. Parents had rights to their children's labor. The law agreed with her. Jackie Coogan, at 21, was effectively broke. The child who'd earned millions, who'd worked since age 4, who'd sacrificed normal childhood for a career that enriched everyone around him. He had almost nothing. His parents had taken it all, and they felt no guilt whatsoever. When Jackie Coogan sued his mother and stepfather in 1935, the case revealed depths of parental exploitation that shocked even Hollywood insiders who thought they'd seen everything. The lawsuit wasn't just about money, though the amounts were staggering. It was about fundamental questions of parental duty, children's rights, and the legal framework that allowed parents to treat their offspring as property. Court documents showed that Lillian and Arthur Bernstein had spent Jackie's millions on mansions in Beverly Hills, luxury cars that filled multi-car garages, jewelry that could fund small businesses, and investments registered solely in their own names. They'd purchased property throughout California, started business ventures that interested them, lived as wealthy socialites while Jackie worked from dawn until dark on film sets. Jackie had been given a $126 weekly allowance from his own earnings, while his parents lived in luxury that rivaled Hollywood's biggest stars. The trial became a public spectacle. Newspapers covered every revelation, every testimony, every piece of evidence showing how completely Jackie's parents had betrayed him. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measure. This wasn't some unknown family. This was Jackie Coogan, the child star everyone knew, the boy who'd made millions smile in The Kid, and his own mother had stolen from him. During the trial, Lillian testified with stunning candor that revealed either complete lack of shame or genuine conviction in her own righteousness. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents, she stated under oath, looking directly at the judge. Jackie wouldn't have earned a cent if it wasn't for us. We created him. We made him a star. The money was ours by natural right. Her lawyer nodded approvingly, as if this were obvious legal logic. Arthur Bernstein, her second husband, who'd helped spend Jackie's fortune, added his own perspective. We gave him the greatest gift of all, fame, he testified. That's worth more than money. He's known around the world. You can't put a price on that. We could have kept him in obscurity, living a normal life. Instead, we made him special. The implication was clear. Jackie should be grateful, not litigious. The legal arguments centered on a fundamental problem. California law in 1935 provided no protection for child performers' earnings. Parents had absolute legal authority over their minor children, including complete control over any money those children earned. A child could work full-time, earn millions, and have no legal right to see a single dollar. The law viewed children as extensions of their parents, their labor as belonging to the family unit under parental control. Jackie's lawyers argued this was unjust. The children had natural rights to their own earnings, regardless of age, that parental authority shouldn't extend to wholesale theft, disguised as family management. The Bernsteins' lawyers countered that parents bore the enormous costs of raising children: food, shelter, clothing, education. That parental investment entitled them to children's earnings as fair compensation. That California law was crystal clear on parental rights and had been for generations. Both sides presented compelling arguments based on fundamentally different views of what children were: independent persons with inherent rights or parental property whose labor belonged to the family unit. The judge, observing the Bernsteins' casual cruelty and obvious lack of remorse, clearly sympathized with Jackie. But sympathy couldn't overcome law. He ruled partially in Jackie's favor, but could only award him $126,000, all that remained of his $4 million earnings. Everything else had been legally spent by parents, exercising their lawful authority over their minor child's income. $126,000 sounds substantial until you consider what was lost. $4 million in 1920s earnings, properly invested, would have made Jackie wealthy for life. Instead, he got back roughly 3% of what he'd earned. The rest had funded his parents' lifestyle, their properties, their investments, their comfortable existence. They'd extracted his childhood, his labor, his talent, and converted it into assets they controlled. The public outrage this generated was immediate and intense. Newspapers ran editorials demanding legal reform. Parent groups, child welfare advocates, and even some Hollywood figures spoke out against the legal framework that had enabled such obvious exploitation. How could the law protect parents who stole from their own children? How could a child work for years and have no right to his own earnings? California legislators, responding to public pressure, began drafting reform legislation. It took 4 years of debate, compromise, and political maneuvering. But in 1939, California passed the Child Actors Bill, popularly known as the Coogan Law. The legislation required that 15% of a child performer's gross earnings be placed in a blocked trust account that parents couldn't access. The money would be held until the child reached majority. 15%, not half, not even a quarter, just 15% protected, leaving 85% still vulnerable to parental control. The law was inadequate, a compromise that protected industry interests and parental authority while offering minimal protection to child performers. But it was something. It established the principle that children had some right to their own earnings. The parental authority had limits, that the law recognized child performers as persons deserving protection. Jackie Coogan, effectively broke at 25, despite years of childhood stardom, had at least ensured future child stars might fare better. His lawsuit changed American law, creating protections that spread beyond California to other states. Every child performer who benefited from trust account protections owed that security to Jackie's willingness to sue his own mother, to expose his family's dysfunction in public court, to fight for a principle even though he couldn't recover what had been stolen from him. The Bernsteins kept their properties, their investments, their comfortable lifestyle, built on Jackie's stolen earnings. They never apologized. They never acknowledged wrongdoing. They died believing they'd done nothing wrong, that they'd exercised legitimate parental authority, that Jackie was ungrateful for the fame they'd given him. Jackie Coogan worked as an actor until his death at 69, never recovering the wealth stolen from his childhood. Peggy Jean Montgomery was born October 26, 1918, to failed vaudevillians who saw their infant daughter as a second chance at the success that had eluded them. Her father, Jack Montgomery, had spent years as a minor Western film stuntman, performing dangerous falls and stunts for $40 a week. It was honest work, but offered no path to real money or recognition. Her mother, Marion, had abandoned stage ambitions to marry Jack, trading dreams of applause for the reality of a stuntman's modest income. Both resented these compromises deeply, feeling they'd settled for less than they deserved. When 18-month-old Peggy wandered onto a Hollywood set where her father worked in 1920, director Fred Fishback noticed something unusual about the child. She could follow simple directions. She didn't cry when strangers approached. She had an instinctive understanding of where the camera was, turning toward it naturally. These traits, unremarkable in an adult performer, but extraordinary in a toddler, caught Fishback's attention. He offered a screen test. Within weeks, baby Peggy had a contract with Century Studios. Within months, she was earning $150,000 annually. Within a year, that figure climbed to $1.5 million, equivalent to approximately $23 million in modern currency. She was 3 years old and generating wealth that exceeded the lifetime earnings of everyone she'd ever met combined. Jack Montgomery quit his $40 weekly stuntman job immediately. He positioned himself as baby Peggy's manager, negotiating with studios, handling contracts, controlling every aspect of his daughter's career. He negotiated ruthlessly, playing studios against each other, demanding higher salaries, better terms, percentage points of profits. He was good at it. The money poured in, torrents of cash that transformed the Montgomery family from working poor to extraordinarily wealthy in less than a year. Marion oversaw Peggy's appearance with obsessive precision that bordered on pathological. The ringlets had to be perfect, exactly the right size and bounce. The dimples had to be visible in every shot, which meant Peggy had to smile constantly, hold the expression until her face ached. The costumes had to fit flawlessly, no wrinkles, no imperfections. Marion would spend hours preparing Peggy for shoots, treating her daughter like a doll to be dressed and posed, rather than a child who might have needs or feelings. Studio memos from Century Films describe baby Peggy's working conditions in detail that's disturbing to read decades later. Shoots lasting 12 to 16 hours were routine. Peggy performed in multiple films simultaneously to maximize output. She'd work on one production in the morning, another in the afternoon, sometimes a third in the evening. The studios were exploiting her ruthlessly, but they couldn't have done it without parental cooperation. When child labor laws were occasionally mentioned, when studio executives worried about potential legal problems, Jack Montgomery produced doctors who certified Peggy's constitution as exceptionally robust. These doctors, paid by Montgomery, examined a 3-year-old working adult hours and declared her healthy enough to continue. The The medical establishment's complicity in child exploitation ran deep. The work continued without interruption. At age 4, Peggy supported not just her parents, but an extended family of relatives who descended upon the Montgomery household once the money started flowing. Jack's brothers, Marion's sisters, cousins, distant relations, they all appeared, needing jobs, needing money, needing support. And Jack hired them, paid them, supported them, all from Peggy's earnings. The 4-year-old became the financial foundation for a sprawling family network. The Montgomerys lived like royalty. They purchased a mansion in the Hollywood Hills with grounds extensive enough to require a full-time gardening staff. They bought luxury cars, multiple vehicles, because Jack liked variety. They hired servants, threw parties, invested in business ventures that interested Jack, all funded by a child who couldn't yet read, who had no understanding of money, who thought this was normal family life. Baby Peggy's fame reached extraordinary heights. She received thousands of fan letters weekly. Her films played in theaters worldwide. Manufacturers produced Baby Peggy dolls, Baby Peggy clothing lines, Baby Peggy merchandise of every description. Licensing deals added to the family income. Jack negotiated percentages on everything, ensuring the Montgomery family profited from every doll sold, every dress manufactured. But the work destroyed normal childhood development. Peggy had no friends her own age. She worked with adults, interacted with adults, lived in an adult world of contracts and negotiations and performance demands. She had no education. Why would her parents bother with schooling when she was earning millions? She had no playtime, no unstructured hours, no childhood innocence. From age 3 to 5, her life consisted of performing, being prepared to perform, or sleeping so she could perform the next day. Jack Montgomery saw nothing wrong with this arrangement. He'd found a way to make extraordinary money, to live the life he'd always felt he deserved. That it came from exploiting his toddler daughter's unusual abilities didn't register as problematic. In his mind, he was providing Peggy with opportunities, making her famous, securing the family's future. The fact that Peggy had no choice in any of it, that she was too young to consent or refuse, that her childhood was being stolen. These considerations never entered Jack's thinking. Marion was equally comfortable with the arrangement. She dressed her famous daughter, maintained her appearance, ensured she looked perfect for cameras. That Peggy was exhausted, that she cried at night, that she showed signs of stress no 3-year-old should experience. Marion ignored all of it. Appearance was everything. Performance was everything. Peggy's inner life, her emotional needs, her right to childhood, none of it mattered compared to maintaining the career. At age 5, baby Peggy was one of the most famous children in America, recognized everywhere she went, adored by millions who watched her films. Fan mail arrived in enormous sacks, thousands of letters weekly from people who'd never met her but felt they knew her. She was also profoundly damaged in ways that wouldn't become fully apparent for years. Her psychological development warped by the experience of being treated as a product rather than a person from her earliest memories. The money kept flowing, and Jack Montgomery kept spending it, convinced the wealth would last forever. Baby Peggy's career ended abruptly in 1924 when her father's impossible demands caused studios to drop her contract. Jack Montgomery had become increasingly aggressive in negotiations, convinced that his daughter's fame gave him unlimited leverage. He'd begun requesting $2 million per film, percentages of gross profits, creative control over productions. Studios that had once competed for baby Peggy's services began looking for alternatives. Child performers were plentiful. No single child star was irreplaceable, not even one as famous as baby Peggy. When Century Studios declined to meet Jack's demands, he assumed other studios would compete for his daughter's services. He was wrong. The studios communicated with each other, shared information about difficult talent and managers. Word spread that Jack Montgomery was unreasonable, greedy, impossible to work with. Offers stopped coming. Peggy's contract wasn't renewed. She was 5 years old. The money stopped immediately. Jack Montgomery's response revealed the purely transactional nature of his relationship with his daughter. He continued spending at the rate of Peggy's peak earning years, assuming the money was infinite, or that new contracts would materialize shortly. He didn't adjust the family budget, didn't reduce expenses, didn't prepare for the possibility that the income might not return. Within 18 months, the family was bankrupt. The mansion went first, sold to pay creditors. Then the cars, the furniture, the luxury items Jack had accumulated. The servants were dismissed. The extended family members who'd been living on Peggy's earnings scattered, finding new hosts to parasitize. Within 2 years of Peggy's last film, the Montgomerys were living in a small apartment, struggling to pay rent, scrambling for any income source. What happened next was worse than financial collapse. Jack and Marion, blaming Peggy for their lost wealth, began a campaign of psychological abuse that would last years. The child who'd been pampered when she was earning money became the scapegoat for everything that went wrong once the income stopped. "You were nothing without us," Jack would say, his voice heavy with resentment. "We made you. We created baby Peggy. You owe us everything." The logic was twisted, but it dominated the Montgomery household. Peggy had earned millions, but that money was gone. And somehow, this was Peggy's fault. If she'd been more talented, more appealing, more valuable, the contracts would have continued. If she'd worked harder, been more professional, maintained her appeal as she aged, the studios wouldn't have dropped her. Every lost opportunity, every financial struggle, every disappointment, Jack blamed his daughter. When Peggy showed interest in school, in normal childhood activities, in anything beyond performing, Marion sneered with contempt. "You think you're too good for this family now?" she'd say. "You think you're special because you were famous? That's over. You're nothing now." The message was clear and repeated constantly. Peggy's value had been entirely dependent on her earning potential. Without that, she was worthless. At age 8, Peggy was enrolled in a conventional school for the first time in her life. She couldn't read. Her parents had never bothered with her education. Why would they, when she was earning money? Reading didn't help with film performance. Formal education was irrelevant to a child star's career. So Peggy had worked from age 3 to 5 without learning basic literacy skills. Classmates mocked the former star, who couldn't spell her own name. Teachers struggled to help a child who was years behind her age group in academic skills. Peggy, accustomed to adult praise and professional respect on film sets, now faced ridicule from 8-year-olds who could read simple books she couldn't decipher. The The humiliation was comprehensive and daily. Jack Montgomery watched his daughter struggle and felt no guilt about having denied her education. Instead, he blamed her for not maintaining her career, for not continuing to earn. In his mind, the problem wasn't that he'd exploited a toddler and stolen her childhood. The problem was that the exploitation had stopped generating income. Through her teenage years, Jack forced Peggy into increasingly desperate performing situations. He booked her on vaudeville tours through failing circuits, theaters in small towns where audiences barely remembered baby Peggy. He arranged cheap personal appearances, county fairs, any venue that would pay anything for a former child star. The money was minimal compared to her film earnings, but Jack grabbed every opportunity to squeeze remaining value from her fading fame. The money went directly to her parents. Peggy never saw it. She performed, earned modest fees, handed everything over to Jack, who spent it immediately. The pattern that had governed her early childhood, work, earn, enrich parents, continued into her teenage years, just with smaller amounts and shabbier venues. At 15, Peggy was working department store appearances, standing in stores, promoting products, smiling for shoppers who barely recognized her. At 16, she was doing radio spots, brief performances for minimal pay. At 17, she was essentially unemployed, her value as a former child star finally exhausted completely. Jack Montgomery's bitterness intensified as Peggy aged and earning opportunities disappeared entirely. He'd tasted wealth, lived like royalty, experienced success beyond his wildest dreams. All of it had come from his daughter's toddler stardom. Now it was gone, and Jack couldn't accept that loss. He couldn't rebuild his life, couldn't find new income sources, couldn't move forward. He remained stuck, psychologically frozen at the peak of baby Peggy's fame, forever resenting that it had ended. Marion was equally unable to process the change. She'd been the mother of the most famous child in America. She'd dressed baby Peggy, managed her appearance, controlled her image. Now she was nobody, mother to a teenager with no prospects, no fame, no value in the entertainment marketplace. The loss of status consumed her. Both parents treated Peggy as the villain in their personal tragedy. She'd failed them by growing up, by losing her toddler appeal, by not somehow maintaining impossible success indefinitely. That they'd exploited her, stolen her childhood, denied her education, damaged her psychologically. None of this registered as their failure. The only failure they recognized was Peggy's inability to keep earning money. At 19, Peggy left home, escaping her parents and their resentment. She had no money, no education, no marketable skills beyond performing, which no longer generated income. But she had freedom from Jack and Marion Montgomery, and that was worth everything. Diana Serra Cary. She reclaimed her birth name after escaping her parents at age 19, spent decades processing what had been done to her. She married, built a career as a historian and author specializing in silent film history, lived independently, created a life entirely separate from baby Peggy. But she never fully escaped the damage. The exploitation she'd endured from ages 3 to 5 cast shadows that reached across her entire lifetime. She lived to 101 years old. That's 96 years after her child's stardom ended. Nearly a century of carrying the psychological weight of what her parents had done. In all those years, the wound never completely healed. Understanding what happened didn't erase it. Time didn't resolve it. The betrayal remained, a permanent scar on her psyche. In her memoir, Whatever Happened to Baby Peggy, published when she was in her 70s, Diana wrote with devastating clarity about the mechanics of parental exploitation. The book wasn't vengeful or hysterical. It was analytical, almost clinical, examining her own childhood with the detachment of a researcher studying historical documents. But the pain bled through the measured prose. I was a commodity to them, nothing more, she stated in one passage that became widely quoted. They literally viewed me as a money printing machine that had unfortunately stopped working. The fact that I was their child, that I was human, that I had needs and feelings, none of this registered. I existed to generate income. When I stopped generating income, I became worthless to them. She described watching her father in old age, decades after baby Peggy's fame had ended, still bitter about the wealth he'd squandered. Jack Montgomery died in his 80s, never having rebuilt his life after the money stopped. He remained psychologically trapped in the mid-1920s, forever angry about lost opportunities, lost wealth, lost status. And he still blamed Peggy. Diana visited him once in his final years. He was living in a modest apartment, supported by Social Security, the mansion and cars and luxury long gone. She'd hoped, she wrote later, that age might have brought perspective, that her elderly father might acknowledge what he'd done, might apologize for stealing her childhood. Instead, Jack complained about the contracts he should have negotiated better, the money that should have lasted longer, the career that should have continued. He never said he was sorry, Diana wrote. Not once in all the years after baby Peggy's career ended did my father acknowledge that he'd done anything wrong. He genuinely believed he'd given me opportunities. The fact that those opportunities destroyed my childhood, denied me education, exploited me from age 3, this never registered as problematic to him. In his mind, he was the victim. I was the one who'd failed him. Her mother was equally unrepentant. Marion Montgomery died convinced she'd been a good mother who'd supported her daughter's career. She never acknowledged the obsessive control, the hours of preparation that treated Peggy like a doll rather than a child, the complicity in denying education and normal development. To her dying day, Marion believed she'd done her maternal duty by managing baby Peggy's appearance and ensuring professional performances. Diana's analysis of stage parent psychology became foundational for researchers studying child exploitation in entertainment. She understood better than almost anyone the mental mechanisms that allowed parents to rationalize abuse as opportunity. They convince themselves they're doing it for the child, she observed in interviews. They say they're securing the child's future, providing opportunities the child wouldn't otherwise have. But watch where the money goes. Watch who makes the decisions. Watch what happens when the child wants to stop. That's when you see the truth. She identified the pattern that would repeat across generations. Failed performers, projecting their ambitions onto talented children. Financial desperation that made children's earning potential irresistible. Gradual erosion of boundaries until parents viewed children primarily as income sources. Rationalization of exploitation as love, of control as protection, of theft as family resource management. Diana herself never had children. In interviews, she acknowledged this was partly because she feared repeating her parents' patterns, feared the possibility of viewing a child as something to exploit rather than someone to nurture. The damage went that deep. It affected her ability to imagine healthy parenting because she'd never experienced it. She became wealthy in her later years through book sales, speaking engagements, and consulting work on silent film projects. The money she earned as an adult, money she controlled herself, gave her security her childhood earnings never provided. But financial security couldn't heal psychological damage. Wealth couldn't restore the childhood that had been stolen. In her 90s, Diana gave extensive interviews about the child star experience. Journalists asked if she'd forgiven her parents. Her answer was nuanced. "I understood them," she said. "I understood the desperation that drove them, the limited options they had, the culture that made child exploitation seem acceptable. Understanding their context doesn't mean forgiving what they did. They had choices. They chose to exploit me. That choice had consequences that lasted my entire life." She was asked if the fame was worth it, if being baby Peggy gave her anything valuable despite the exploitation. She paused before answering, choosing her words carefully. "I got history," she finally said. "I became part of film history, silent era history. That has value, but its value I appreciate as an adult looking back. As a child, I wanted what every child wants: love, safety, education, play. I didn't get those things. Was it a fair trade? No. Would I choose it again? Absolutely not." The interviewer pressed. Surely there were good memories, positive experiences from her time as baby Peggy. Diana shook her head. "People want there to be silver linings," she said. "They want the story to be complicated, mixed, some good with the bad. But my childhood stardom was exploitation, period. My parents stole my childhood and spent the money. There's no silver lining in that. There's just damage and the long work of surviving it." Diana Serra, Cary, died in 2020 at age 101. She outlived her parents by decades, outlived most of her generation, outlived nearly everyone who remembered baby Peggy firsthand. She spent 96 years processing what had been done to her in the 5 years between age 3 and age 8. That ratio, 96 years of aftermath for 5 years of exploitation, tells you everything you need to know about the cost of child stardom when parents choose profit over protection. Maria Zakharenko emigrated from Russia with dreams of stardom that were crushed by poverty, language barriers, and lack of opportunity in America. She'd imagined herself on stage, celebrated, admired, living the glamorous life she'd seen in magazines and films. Instead, she married Nikolai Zakharenko, a factory worker whose prospects matched his ambitions, modest and limited. When she gave birth to Natasha Zakharenko on July 20th, 1938, Maria saw a second chance, a beautiful child who could succeed where Maria had failed. The child was extraordinarily pretty, even as an infant. Large eyes, delicate features, natural photogenic quality. Maria recognized these traits as valuable in Hollywood's ecosystem. She began planning Natasha's career before the child could walk. This wasn't maternal ambition in normal ranges. This was obsession, a complete psychological fusion where Maria's identity and worth became dependent on her daughter's success. Before Natalie, the Americanized name Maria chose, erasing her daughter's Russian identity to make her more marketable, could walk, Maria was taking her to casting calls. She pushed through crowds of other mothers with their daughters, elbowing her way to the front, insisting directors see Natalie. Maria's English was heavily accented, often broken, but her determination transcended language barriers. She would be noticed. Her daughter would be seen. By age 4, Natalie was working regularly in films. Small roles at first, background parts, brief appearances. Maria accompanied her daughter to every audition, every shoot, positioning herself not as a supportive parent, but as a co-star in Natalie's career. On set, Maria wouldn't sit quietly in designated areas for parents. She hovered near the camera, watching every take, critiquing Natalie's performance between shots, offering unsolicited direction to directors who tried to ignore her. Former child actors who worked with young Natalie described Maria's behavior on set as disturbing. She would whisper in Natalie's ear before emotional scenes, saying things designed to upset her daughter so the crying would look authentic. Other actors overheard these whispered sessions, Maria telling Natalie about family tragedies, describing frightening scenarios, sometimes threatening abandonment. Whatever it took to generate genuine tears. During the filming of Tomorrow is Forever, when Natalie was 7, a scene required her to cry while begging not to be left alone. Maria pulled Natalie aside before the take. Witnesses reported hearing Maria tell her daughter that if she didn't cry convincingly, they'd lose their house and starve on the streets. Natalie sobbed genuinely, terrified by her mother's threats. The director praised the performance. Maria smiled, satisfied her technique had worked. This was Maria's method. Terrorize Natalie into authentic emotional responses, then accept praise for her daughter's natural acting ability. The psychological manipulation was systematic and calculated. Maria understood that frightened children gave believable performances, so she kept Natalie frightened. As Natalie matured into adolescence, Maria's involvement became more invasive and controlling. She chose Natalie's friends, vetting every potential relationship for its impact on her daughter's career. Children of industry people were acceptable. Children of ordinary families were discouraged. Maria wanted Natalie surrounded only by people who could advance her professional prospects. When Natalie began showing interest in boys at 15, Maria interrogated potential boyfriends with intensity that made police detectives seem casual. She assessed their families, their connections, their potential usefulness to Natalie's image. Love was irrelevant. Romance was a publicity tool. Maria managed Natalie's dating life like she managed every other aspect of her daughter's existence, strategically, ruthlessly, with complete disregard for Natalie's actual feelings. Maria controlled Natalie's appearance obsessively. Hair had to be perfect, styled exactly as Maria specified. Makeup had to be applied according to Maria's instructions. Clothing had to meet Maria's approval. Natalie couldn't choose her own appearance. Maria made those decisions, treating her teenage daughter like a doll to be dressed and displayed. The control extended to Natalie's education. Maria enrolled her in studio schools that accommodated filming schedules, schools where education was secondary to career convenience. Natalie's intellectual development mattered less than her availability for auditions and shoots. When Natalie showed interest in subjects beyond what was immediately useful for acting, Maria discouraged it. "You don't need that," Maria would say. "Focus on what matters, your career." Financial control was absolute. Natalie earned substantial money as a child and teenage star, but Maria managed every dollar. Natalie received modest allowances, while Maria spent freely on herself, on the household, on maintaining appearances that supported Natalie's image. The money Natalie earned through her labor funded Maria's lifestyle completely. Maria didn't work outside managing Natalie's career. She had no income of her own, no skills beyond exploiting her daughter's talent. Natalie was Maria's entire economic foundation, her sole purpose, her complete identity. This made Maria's control even more desperate and totalizing. Without Natalie's success, Maria had nothing. The psychological dynamic was toxic beyond normal stage mother dysfunction. Maria didn't just push Natalie into performing, she lived through Natalie, experiencing her daughter's successes as her own achievements, her daughter's setbacks as personal failures. Maria's sense of self had merged completely with Natalie's career. There was no boundary, no separation, no recognition that Natalie was a separate person with her own needs and desires. Natalie learned early that resistance was futile and costly. When she tried to assert independence, Maria would threaten, manipulate, or emotionally withdraw until Natalie complied. The child learned that obedience was the only path to something resembling maternal approval. Defiance meant psychological warfare. Natalie couldn't win. By her mid-teens, Natalie was a rising star in Hollywood, beautiful and talented, earning significant money, working steadily. To outsiders, she seemed successful and fortunate. Behind closed doors, she was trapped in a relationship with a mother who viewed her as property, as an extension of Maria's ego, as a tool to fulfill ambitions Maria had abandoned for herself. The worst was yet to come. Maria's control was about to enable something beyond exploitation, beyond manipulation, beyond the psychological damage she'd already inflicted. Maria was about to prioritize Natalie's career over her daughter's safety in ways that would leave permanent scars. In 1955, during production of The Searchers, 16-year-old Natalie Wood was raped by a prominent Hollywood actor in a hotel room arranged by the studio. The details of this assault remained hidden for decades, protected by the culture of silence that surrounded Hollywood's abuse of young performers. Multiple sources, including Natalie's younger sister, Lana Wood, later confirmed the assault occurred. The identity of the perpetrator was known to many in the industry, but never publicly revealed during Natalie's lifetime. The assault itself was horrific enough. A 16-year-old girl, legally still a child, violated by an adult man in a position of power. But what happened next revealed something arguably worse: the systematic betrayal by the people who should have protected her. The studio knew, Maria knew, and both chose career over safety, profit over justice, image over truth. When Natalie told her mother what had happened, trembling and traumatized, seeking comfort and protection, Maria's response was not to comfort her devastated daughter. She didn't report the crime to police. She didn't pull Natalie from the production. She didn't confront the perpetrator or demand accountability from the studio. Instead, Maria told Natalie to keep quiet. "This is the price you pay for stardom," Maria allegedly said, her voice cold and practical. "If you make trouble, you'll never work again." Think about what that meant. A 16-year-old girl, just raped, turns to her mother for help and protection. The mother, the person who should defend her child above all else, tells her to be silent, to accept what happened, to protect her rapist's career and her own professional prospects. The betrayal was comprehensive and devastating. The actor was never reported. No police investigation occurred. No charges were filed. No accountability demanded. The assault was buried, classified as one of those unfortunate things that happened in Hollywood. The cost of doing business in an industry where powerful men could abuse young women with impunity. The studio had arranged the hotel room, creating the circumstances that made the assault possible, and then participated actively in the cover-up. Maria's complicity made the whole thing possible and ensured it would never be addressed or acknowledged. Natalie continued working on The Searchers. She showed up on set, performed her scenes, acted professionally despite the trauma. What choice did she have? Her mother had made clear that speaking up would end her career. The studio had made clear they would protect the perpetrator, not the victim. Natalie was 16 years old, legally unable to make her own decisions, completely dependent on adults who had failed her catastrophically. The psychological impact was enormous and lasting. Natalie had already learned that her mother valued her primarily as an earning instrument. Now she learned something worse, that Maria would sacrifice even Natalie's physical safety to maintain career momentum. There was literally nothing Maria wouldn't accept, no violation she wouldn't enable, no trauma she wouldn't dismiss if it served professional interests. Years later, Natalie would tell friends that this moment, her mother choosing career over her safety when she told Natalie to hide her assault, was when she understood she had never been loved as a daughter. Not really, not in any way that mattered. Maria's love was conditional, transactional, completely dependent on Natalie's value as a performer. When protecting Natalie conflicted with protecting her career, the career won every time. The assault and subsequent cover-up taught Natalie terrible lessons about her own worth. She learned that powerful men could violate her with impunity. She learned that institutions wouldn't protect her. She learned that even her own mother would prioritize profit over her safety. These lessons shaped how Natalie navigated Hollywood for the rest of her life, with justified paranoia, appropriate distrust, and deep psychological wounds that never fully healed. Maria's control extended into Natalie's marriages, continuing the pattern of invasive interference that had defined their relationship. When Natalie married Robert Wagner at 18, Maria didn't respect their need for independence. She moved into a house on their property, positioning herself to monitor the relationship constantly. This wasn't normal concern for a daughter's welfare. This was possession, control, the inability to allow Natalie any life separate from Maria's oversight. Maria was there at breakfast, commenting on what Natalie ate. There at dinner, inserting herself into conversations. There during arguments, taking sides, offering unwanted advice. Wagner tolerated this invasion for a while, trying to accommodate his wife's difficult mother. But the marriage couldn't survive Maria's constant presence and interference. When the marriage failed after just a few years, Maria blamed Wagner entirely. She never acknowledged her own role in making the relationship impossible. In Maria's mind, she'd been helping, supporting, ensuring her daughter's marriage succeeded. The fact that her constant interference had actually destroyed the marriage never registered. Maria was incapable of seeing herself as anything but Natalie's devoted protector. The pattern Maria established, prioritizing career over safety, control over autonomy, image over truth, defined Natalie's entire childhood and adolescence. Every decision Maria made reinforced the same message. Natalie existed to succeed professionally. Everything else was secondary. Her education, her friendships, her relationships, her bodily autonomy, her emotional well-being. All of it mattered less than maintaining her career. Maria genuinely believed she was being a good mother. She'd pushed Natalie into stardom, managed her career successfully, ensured her daughter became a major Hollywood figure. That this came at the cost of Natalie's childhood, safety, and psychological health didn't register as failure in Maria's mind. Success was measured in career achievements, not in the well-being of the child forced to achieve them. The assault and cover-up represented the logical endpoint of Maria's priorities. If career mattered more than education, more than friendships, more than autonomy, then of course it mattered more than justice for sexual assault. Maria's value system was consistent, just horrifically warped. Natalie's worth was entirely dependent on her professional success. Anything that threatened that success, even seeking justice for rape, had to be suppressed. Natalie carried this trauma for the rest of her life. Another wound in the collection of damages her mother had inflicted. Natalie Wood never escaped her mother's psychological grip. This is the simple, tragic truth that defined her entire life. Even after becoming a major star with financial independence, even after multiple marriages and children of her own, even after years of therapy and conscious attempts to establish boundaries, Maria remained a dominating presence. The damage was too deep, the conditioning too thorough, the patterns too ingrained. Natalie paid for Maria's lifestyle completely. The house Maria lived in, the cars she drove, the clothes she wore, the food she ate, all funded by Natalie's earnings. This financial dependency gave Maria leverage, but the real control was psychological. Natalie had been conditioned from early childhood to seek Maria's approval, to view her mother's satisfaction as necessary for her own worth. Breaking that conditioning proved impossible. She endured Maria's criticisms throughout her adult life. Maria commented on Natalie's appearance, her weight, her choice of roles, her relationships, her parenting. Nothing was off limits to Maria's judgment, and Natalie, despite being a grown woman and major star, still sought her mother's approval, still hoped for unconditional acceptance that Maria was incapable of providing. She submitted to Maria's interference in professional and personal decisions well into adulthood. When Natalie considered turning down a role, Maria would pressure her to accept it. When Natalie wanted to take time off, Maria would push her to keep working. Maria's voice internalized from childhood, told Natalie that her value depended on constant professional activity, that taking breaks meant losing relevance, that rest was weakness. Friends described Natalie's relationship with her mother as a form of Stockholm Syndrome. Natalie both loved and feared Maria, one close friend recalled in interviews years later. She desperately wanted Maria's approval while simultaneously knowing Maria was incapable of giving unconditional love. She understood intellectually that Maria had damaged her, but emotionally she couldn't break free. It was tragic to watch. The psychological damage manifested in various ways that shaped Natalie's entire personality. She had a lifelong fear of water, which Maria had apparently instilled through superstitious warnings when Natalie was young. Maria told Natalie that she would die in dark water, a prophecy that became a phobia Natalie carried throughout her life. The irony of this fear, given how Natalie eventually died, haunted those who knew about Maria's predictions. Natalie struggled with depression that required ongoing treatment and medication. Therapy helped her understand the roots of these struggles: the childhood trauma, the maternal exploitation, the assault and subsequent betrayal. But understanding didn't cure the depression. Knowing why you're damaged doesn't automatically heal the damage. She had a constant need for reassurance that people in her life found exhausting. Natalie would ask repeatedly if she was loved, if she was valued, if she was good enough. This need stemmed directly from her childhood experience of conditional love, of approval that depended entirely on professional performance. As an adult, Natalie couldn't quite believe people might value her for herself rather than for what she could provide. She had difficulty trusting people's affection for her. Were they attracted to Natalie the person or Natalie the star? Did they love her or what she represented? These questions plagued her relationships, creating tensions that were hard to resolve. The damage Maria had done, teaching Natalie from age 4 that her worth was purely transactional, poisoned Natalie's ability to accept love as genuine rather than conditional. Therapy helped Natalie understand the roots of these issues. She spent years in psychoanalysis, working through the trauma, identifying the patterns, recognizing how her mother's exploitation had shaped her psychology. She became quite sophisticated in her self-understanding, able to articulate exactly how and why Maria had damaged her. But understanding didn't erase the damage. Knowledge isn't healing, just illumination of the wound. When Natalie drowned in 1981 under mysterious circumstances off Catalina Island, the questions surrounding her death were never fully answered. The official explanation was accidental drowning. The actual events of that night remained unclear, disputed by different witnesses, complicated by alcohol consumption and conflicting testimonies. What is clear is that Natalie died in dark water, just as Maria had predicted years earlier. Maria's response to her daughter's death followed the pattern that had governed their entire relationship. She immediately began controlling the narrative, positioning herself as the grieving mother. She gave interviews, managed media access, shaped public understanding of Natalie's life and death. Even in grief, Maria was performing, managing image, controlling the story. Within months, Maria was exploring how to monetize Natalie's death. Book deals were discussed. Media appearances were negotiated. Licensing agreements for Natalie's image were considered. The same instinct that had driven Maria to exploit Natalie as a child now drove her to exploit Natalie's death. The commodity had changed from living daughter to deceased icon. But Maria's fundamental approach remained consistent. Friends of Natalie's were disgusted, but not surprised. Maria had never valued Natalie as a person, only as a source of income and vicarious fame. Why would death change that fundamental dynamic? If anything, Natalie's death made her more valuable, immortalized at the height of her beauty and fame, transformed into tragic icon rather than aging actress. Even in death, Natalie remained her mother's commodity. The exploitation that had defined their relationship continued beyond Natalie's lifetime, with Maria profiting from her daughter's memory, just as she'd profited from her daughter's childhood labor. The final cruelty was that Natalie had never fully escaped. She'd tried. She'd established physical distance, limited contact, set boundaries that Maria constantly violated. She'd spent years in therapy, built her own family, created a life separate from Maria's control. But the psychological grip remained. The damage was permanent. The conditioning couldn't be undone. Natalie Wood died at 43, carrying unresolved trauma from a childhood spent being exploited by her mother. She'd had 25 years of adult life to heal, to process, to recover. It wasn't enough. The wound went too deep. Some damage can't be repaired, only endured. And Maria, outliving her daughter, continued profiting from Natalie's fame until Maria's own death years later. Terry Shields was an alcoholic former model whose career had faltered when she became pregnant at 22. She'd had some success as a Ford model, enough to taste the life of minor fame and decent money, but not enough to sustain it. When she discovered she was pregnant, unmarried, in the early 1960s, her modeling prospects dimmed considerably. She named her daughter Brooke, after the Brooke Club where Terry had worked as a model, signaling from birth the child's purpose, to fulfill her mother's abandoned ambitions and recapture the success Terry had lost. By 11 months, Brooke was modeling. Terry pushed her infant daughter into the industry with the same determination Maria had shown with Natalie, the same obsession Jack Montgomery had demonstrated with baby Peggy. This wasn't normal maternal pride in a pretty child. This was calculated exploitation, viewing an infant as a product to be marketed, a commodity to generate income and vicarious fame. Brooke's early modeling work was conventional enough. Baby product advertisements, catalog photos, the kind of work that many attractive children did without lasting damage. But Terry's ambitions extended beyond conventional child modeling. She wanted Brooke to be extraordinary, controversial, noticed. She wanted Brooke to achieve things Terry herself had never accomplished. By age 12, Brooke was appearing in Pretty Baby, a film set in a New Orleans brothel where she played a child prostitute in scenes that required nudity. The film, directed by Louis Malle, was positioned as serious art exploring uncomfortable historical realities. But the reality was simple. It featured a 12-year-old girl in sexual situations with full nudity, marketed to adult audiences. Terry negotiated the contract. Terry approved the scenes. Terry was on set, watching her 12-year-old daughter perform in scenarios that any reasonable person would recognize as inappropriate. When critics pointed out that she was essentially prostituting her daughter for the camera, Terry's response was defiant and revealing. "It's art," Terry insisted. "Anyone who sees it as sexual has a dirty mind." This defense was calculated gaslighting. The film explicitly sexualized a child. That was its controversial appeal, the reason it generated publicity and box office interest. But Terry positioned criticism as the viewer's problem, not her decision to place her daughter in those situations. She transformed her own exploitation of Brooke into evidence of critics' perverted minds. The pattern continued with increasingly disturbing projects. At 14, Brooke appeared in Calvin Klein jeans advertisements with the tagline, "Nothing comes between me and my Calvins." The accompanying visuals featured sexually suggestive posing that Terry approved and encouraged. A 14-year-old positioned as a sexual object, marketing jeans to adults with her mother's full cooperation. The advertisements generated enormous controversy and extensive media coverage, which translated into publicity that money couldn't buy, which translated into higher fees for Brooke's subsequent work. Terry understood the economics of scandal perfectly. Controversial equaled newsworthy, equaled valuable in the entertainment marketplace. She pushed Brooke into increasingly provocative projects, calculating that outrage would boost earning potential even as it damaged her daughter psychologically. The more people protested, the more Brooke's name stayed in headlines, the more valuable she became to advertisers and producers. When critics accused Terry of exploiting her daughter, of damaging Brooke for profit, Terry's response was consistent. "I'm giving Brooke opportunities," she would say. "She'll thank me someday. I'm opening doors for her that would never be available otherwise." The justification was identical to what every stage parent told themselves. They were providing opportunities, creating success, ensuring their child's future. But watch what Terry controlled. Every aspect of Brooke's life fell under maternal supervision. Terry monitored Brooke's diet obsessively, ensuring she maintained the exact weight and figure that photographed well. Terry chose Brooke's friends, vetting relationships for potential impact on Brooke's image. Terry controlled Brooke's schedule completely, deciding which opportunities to accept, which to refuse. Brooke was not allowed to date. Terry positioned this as protection, keeping her daughter safe from boys who might take advantage of her fame. But the reality was control. Romantic relationships would mean emotional attachments Terry couldn't monitor, time spent away from maternal oversight, normal teenage development that might interfere with career management. Brooke was not allowed privacy of any kind. Terry accompanied her everywhere, to shoots, to school events, to any social activities. She monitored phone calls, listening in or demanding to know who Brooke talked to and what was discussed. She read Brooke's mail, controlling access to her daughter with totalitarian thoroughness. This wasn't normal parental supervision designed to keep a child safe. This was possession, the complete denial of boundaries between parent and child, the erasure of any private space where Brooke could develop independent thoughts or relationships. Brooke was not allowed any decision-making autonomy. Terry made every choice: what Brooke wore, what she ate, where she went, who she saw, which projects she accepted. Brooke was treated as Terry's property, an extension of Terry's will, rather than a separate person with her own desires and rights. Terry positioned this control as protection, repeating constantly that she was keeping Brooke safe in a dangerous industry. But the protection narrative was cover for possession. Terry's primary concern wasn't Brooke's safety. It was maintaining complete control over her valuable asset, ensuring that nothing interfered with Brooke's earning potential and Terry's vicarious fame. The reality was stark. Terry was an alcoholic whose drinking intensified as Brooke's fame grew. She lived entirely off Brooke's earnings, having no income of her own. She had sacrificed her daughter's childhood, her normalcy, her innocence, placing her in sexual situations at 12 and 14, all while claiming to be a protective mother. Brooke, like Judy and Natalie and baby Peggy before her, learned that her worth was transactional. Love was conditional on career success. Approval depended on performance. Her mother valued her only for what she could provide: income, fame, opportunities for Terry to live vicariously through her daughter's success. The damage was comprehensive and would take decades to process. But unlike some of the earlier child stars, Brooke would eventually escape, would eventually establish boundaries, would eventually build a life separate from Terry's control. The road to freedom would be long and painful, but at least it would be possible. Brooke Shields' escape from her mother's control was gradual and painful, a process that took years and required repeated assertions of independence that Terry fought at every step. Unlike child stars from earlier eras who had fewer tools and less cultural support for recognizing parental abuse, Brooke came of age in a period when therapy was more accepted, when boundaries were more discussable, when the language of psychological damage was more available. Attending Princeton University was the first significant act of independence. Brooke was accepted to one of the nation's most prestigious universities, an achievement that reflected genuine intelligence beyond her modeling and acting work. Terry had wanted Brooke to continue acting full-time, to capitalize on her fame while it peaked, to maximize earning potential. College meant time away from the industry, away from income generation, away from Terry's constant oversight. Brooke insisted. This was among her first major refusals, a decision she made despite Terry's opposition. Going to Princeton meant physical separation from Terry for months at a time. It meant exposure to people and ideas outside the entertainment industry. It meant the possibility of developing an identity separate from Brooke Shields the actress or Brooke Shields the model. Terry resisted fiercely, but Brooke held firm. The college years gave Brooke perspective that had been impossible while living under Terry's constant control. She met people who hadn't known her as a child star, who valued her for intelligence rather than appearance. She studied literature and romance languages, engaging her mind in ways that acting had never required. She began, tentatively, to imagine a life not entirely defined by her mother's ambitions. But Terry maintained influence even during the Princeton years. She called constantly, visited frequently, monitored Brooke's activities as much as distance allowed. Terry couldn't accept that her control was diminishing, that Brooke was developing autonomy. The separation was partial, limited, fragile. Brooke was establishing boundaries, but they remained vulnerable to Terry's pressure. Marriage to Andre Agassi at 29, was another break in Terry's control. Terry disapproved of the relationship, having preferred to keep Brooke single and dependent. A husband meant another person with claims on Brooke's time and loyalty, someone who might compete with Terry's influence. The marriage was brief, lasting only 2 years, but it represented another step toward independence. During this period, Brooke was in therapy, working to understand the dynamics that had governed her childhood and adolescence. The therapy was revealing and difficult. Brooke had to confront the reality that her mother had exploited her, that the opportunities Terry had provided came at enormous psychological cost, that the control Terry had positioned as protection was actually possession. The full reckoning came in Brooke's 40s, after years of therapy and life experience, when she began publicly acknowledging the problematic nature of her mother's management. In interviews, Brooke carefully navigated between defending her mother's intentions while acknowledging the damage done. "She loved me," Brooke would say, her voice carrying the weight of complicated emotions. "But she also commodified me in ways that weren't healthy." This acknowledgement was huge, a public statement that her mother's behavior had been harmful despite being motivated by love. Brooke was threading a difficult needle, validating her own experience of harm while not entirely condemning Terry, maintaining some loyalty to her mother while finally naming the exploitation that had occurred. Terry's alcoholism worsened as she aged, her drinking becoming more severe as her control over Brooke diminished. The dynamic shifted. Brooke, now a successful adult with her own career and family, took on caretaker responsibilities for her aging, alcoholic mother. Some therapists viewed this role reversal as continued dysfunction. Brooke, still unable to fully separate from Terry, still responding to maternal needs despite the harm Terry had caused. When Terry developed dementia in her 70s, Brooke cared for her mother with devotion that puzzled friends who knew the history. "She destroyed parts of you," one friend reportedly said, struggling to understand why Brooke would dedicate herself to caring for someone who'd exploited her so thoroughly. Brooke's response was simple and complicated. "She was still my mother." This statement captured the essential tragedy of the stage parent dynamic. No matter how much harm parents inflict, no matter how thoroughly they exploit their children, the fundamental relationship remains. Brooke couldn't stop being Terry's daughter. The bond persisted despite and through the abuse, creating obligations and emotions that rational analysis couldn't resolve. Terry Shields died in 2012. Brooke's eulogy was carefully worded, acknowledging her mother's love while omitting the exploitation, focusing on positive memories while avoiding the damage. It was a diplomatic speech, honoring the dead while protecting Brooke's own boundaries. Some in attendance, who knew the full history, found it remarkably generous. Others found it sad that even in death, Brooke felt obligated to protect her mother's image. In later interviews, after Terry's death freed her from concerns about maternal feelings, Brooke became more candid. "My mother did things to me, with me, that would be considered child abuse today," she said in one interview. She didn't see it that way. She thought she was building my career, giving me opportunities. But putting a 12-year-old in sexual situations, controlling every aspect of her life, living entirely off her earnings, that's exploitation, even if it's motivated by love. Brooke continued, The line between stage mother and abuser is thinner than people want to believe. My mother never hit me. She clothed me in designer outfits. She ensured I worked with top photographers and directors. But she also stole my childhood, denied me autonomy, put me in inappropriate situations for profit. Does good treatment in some areas excuse abuse in others? I don't think so. These reflections came decades after the exploitation occurred, after years of therapy and processing and building a life independent of Terry's control. Brooke had escaped, had created boundaries, had developed the language and understanding to name what had been done to her. But escape and understanding didn't erase the damage. They just made it possible to live with it, to build despite it, to survive what couldn't be undone. Brooke Shields, unlike Judy Garland, who died young, or Natalie Wood, who drowned with unresolved trauma, lived to tell her story. She survived her mother's exploitation and spoke about it publicly, contributing to cultural understanding of child abuse in entertainment. But survival came at enormous cost, carried forward through decades of psychological work. These stories, spanning Hollywood's golden age through the late 20th century, reveal a consistent pattern of parental exploitation disguised as ambition. The stage parents who damaged Judy Garland, Jackie Coogan, baby Peggy, Natalie Wood, and Brooke Shields shared common characteristics that emerged clearly across different eras and circumstances. They were failed performers living vicariously through their children, unable to see their children as separate individuals, convinced that extreme measures were justified by career success, and demonstrating complete absence of guilt or remorse. The psychological mechanism is well documented now. These parents experienced narcissistic fusion with their children. The child became an extension of the parent's ego, rather than a separate person with independent needs and rights. The child's achievements became the parent's achievements. The child's earnings became the parent's wealth. The child's suffering became necessary sacrifice for the parent's dreams. This fusion was so complete that parents genuinely couldn't distinguish between helping their children and exploiting them. Ethel Gum administered amphetamines to 12-year-old Judy and believed she was supporting her daughter's career. Jack Coogan Sr. stole millions from his son and believed he was investing family resources wisely. Jack and Marion Montgomery worked toddler Peggy 18 hours daily and believed they were providing opportunities. Maria Zakharenko told Natalie to hide her rape and believed she was protecting her daughter's career. Terry Shields put 12-year-old Brooke in sexual situations and believed she was creating artistic opportunities. The self-deception required to rationalize this exploitation was profound but remarkably consistent. Every stage parent told themselves the same story. They were giving their child opportunities the child wouldn't have otherwise. They were building security for the future. They were helping their talented child reach their potential. The fact that this help involved stealing money, denying education, destroying health, enabling assault, or sexualizing children, none of this registered as contradictory to the helping narrative. The law evolved slowly in response to these abuses. The Coogan Law of 1939 established that children had some right to their own earnings, protecting 15% while leaving 85% vulnerable. Modern protections include mandatory trust accounts, limited working hours, required education, and on-set welfare workers monitoring conditions. But laws can only address financial and physical exploitation. They can't prevent psychological damage. They can't ensure parental love is genuine rather than conditional. They can't protect children from the message that their worth depends entirely on professional success. Legal reforms have made it harder for parents to steal money, but they haven't eliminated the fundamental dynamic where parents view children primarily as income sources. What none of the laws can address is the psychological damage that persists across lifetimes. Judy Garland died at 47 of a drug overdose, her body destroyed by the addiction her mother initiated at age 12. Natalie Wood drowned at 43, carrying unresolved trauma to her death. She never fully escaped her mother's psychological grip. Jackie Coogan worked until his death at 69, never recovering the wealth stolen from his childhood. Diana Serra Cary lived 101 years, but never fully healed from what her parents did to her between ages 3 and 8. That ratio, 96 years of aftermath for 5 years of exploitation, demonstrates the lasting impact of childhood trauma. She understood her parents' psychology, analyzed the mechanisms of her exploitation, contributed to academic understanding of child abuse. But understanding didn't heal the wound. Brooke survived and spoke publicly about the exploitation, contributing to cultural awareness. But survival required decades of therapy, repeated assertions of independence, and enormous psychological work. The damage was permanent, even as Brooke learned to live despite it. The question that haunts these stories is whether the parents understood what they were doing. Did Ethel Gum know she was destroying her daughter when she administered those pills? Did Jack Coogan Sr. recognize he was stealing from his own child? Did Maria Zakharenko understand she was choosing career over her daughter's safety when she told Natalie to hide her assault? Did Terry Shields recognize she was sexualizing her daughter for profit? The evidence suggests they knew and didn't care, or knew and rationalized it away, or, most disturbing, genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. The capacity of parents to convince themselves that exploitation is love, that abuse is opportunity, that damage is investment, remains one of the darker aspects of human psychology. These weren't monsters. They were ordinary people whose ambitions and desperation warped their judgment so thoroughly that they could destroy their children while believing themselves devoted parents. Hollywood has changed since Judy Garland bled into her shoes on a soundstage in 1935. Child labor laws exist. Trust accounts are mandatory. Working hours are limited. But scroll through social media today, and you'll find new stage parents documenting their children's every moment, monetizing their innocence. The children are younger now, toddlers, even infants. The medium is different, YouTube instead of film studios. But the pattern continues. These modern stage parents convince themselves they're providing opportunities while harvesting attention and income from their children's lives. They tell themselves it's different because the child seems happy, because the work happens at home. But the fundamental dynamic remains, children being commodified by parents for parental benefit. The bright lights still cast the same dark shadows. Some children still pay the price for their parents' dreams. The pattern continues because ambition can wear the mask of love so convincingly that even those causing harm believe they're doing good. This is what we owe these damaged stars. Not pity, but recognition. Recognition that their suffering revealed something true about the corruption that can infect the parent-child relationship when fame and money enter the equation. Recognition that every protection for child performers exists because these particular children were sacrificed to create them. Recognition that every time we watch Judy Garland sing Over the Rainbow, we're watching a girl who never found her way home, who was betrayed by the person who should have protected her most. The story of Hollywood's stage parents is ultimately about the question that opened this narrative. What do parents owe their children? The answer, written in the damaged lives of these performers, is clear. Protection over profit, safety over success, love without conditions, childhood without exploitation. These stars gave us their performances. Their parents took everything else.